We can argue all night whether something is political or not political. We can argue all night about the pros and the cons of what's going on at the border. But unless this country returns back to a fundamental belief that God is in charge, that we ought be Spirit-led, what's going to happen is that the leaders will mire in controversy as opposed to seeking the true and living God. And I'm concerned about that.
Yeah. Governor Mike Huckabee, first of all, thank you for letting us borrow your beautiful set here tonight.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and as the former governor of Arkansas, you were known for law and order. I think it's interesting. We talk about New York City, Eric, and the big cities, blue states, but this is a concern in small town America as well, in places like Arkansas, where you hail from. What are your thoughts on this growing trend towards lawlessness in the U.S., and what can we do to push back against it?
I think we have to understand what the nature of it is. And the nature of it is, if children grow up where they do not understand there's right, there's wrong, and there are consequences for doing wrong, then you're going to have lawlessness. Why wouldn't you? These are lessons we learn in the sandbox. But if we don't learn them in the sandbox, we'll learn them in the jail cell. And we may not learn them there. And during my tenure as governor, you and I ran the prison system. Let me assure you, nobody was in the Arkansas Department of Corrections because they sang too loud at church last Sunday. They did some bad stuff. And a lot of these people could have done good things, but they never were told no. They were never told that there are certain unacceptable behaviors and there are severe consequences. And so by the time a person becomes an adult and has spent a lifetime of rebelling against what we would call, in the biblical sense, natural law, a clear understanding that some things you don't even have to be taught are right and wrong, but for some people who don't have a biblical education, they do have to be taught those things. It's wrong to kill somebody. It's wrong to steal. It's wrong to lie. Now, where did we get that idea that it's wrong? Well, maybe from the Ten Commandments and from the lesson of Jesus. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But if you've never had that foundation, you've grown up with a mindset that says, do unto others before they do unto you. If you can get away with it, it's okay. And if it feels good, do it. We have to understand, Eric was right. This is not a political issue. This is a moral issue. It is a soul issue. Politics can give us different parameters, but let's be very clear. Politics is not the solution to what is really at the heart of America's problem, and that is it's a sin issue more than it is a law issue.
Yeah, that's true. Governor, that's why it's great that we're doing what we do here on TBN, where we can break down, Sheila, the biblical perspective on all of these issues. Take it for us, too, that biblical worldview when it comes to the crime and lawlessness and what it says, really. This is called the State of the Nation 2023. What does this say about the state of America right now?
You know, one of the things I find fascinating is I've been studying Matthew's gospel recently, and in Matthew 24, we have what's called the Olivet Discourse, where Jesus is looking to the future and prophetically telling what's going to happen. And in the Olivet Discourse, you almost find everything we're struggling with as a nation. And he says then, as lawlessness increases, the love of many will grow cold. And there seems to be a correlation between, you would think as lawlessness increases, then people would run more toward the Lord, but that doesn't seem to be happening. A lot of people are backing away from their faith. And further on in Matthew's gospel, it says, as in the days of Noah, that it will happen in these days. And I think we see that.
Yeah, for sure. And Rick, you've worked with young people as a college professor, as a team chaplain, and many other roles you've played. How do you see the way forward when it comes to this issue? It seems that things are pretty much out of control right now. I don't want to say a state of anarchy, but in the cities, it's a pretty nasty situation. How can we start drilling down and fighting back and taking this country back for not only for law, but for Judeo-Christian values?
Yeah, I think that the symptoms that we speak of really indicate a deeper issue, and that's we've strayed away from the basics of the Bible. We just have, it's not a black issue. It's not a brown issue. It's not a white issue. It's not a left issue. It's not a right issue. It is a spiritual issue that is, I believe, just a counter effort against the heart of Christ. When I was a kid, you knew what the basics were. You knew what the normative values were in the neighborhood. And I'm sorry, Tyler Perry, but there were Medeas back in the 60s. And come on, y'all, we had big mamas and big daddies, and no matter where you went, everyone knew what the deal was. And I think in order to restore any semblance of standards and any semblance of discipline, I think we have to realize fundamentally what we're doing wrong as a family. We're trying to be our kids' buddy, trying to be our kids' pal. They need that. Maybe when they're in their 20s and 30s and 40s, but not at 12 and 14. Set a standard for that child, a biblical standard that goes back to right and wrong. We come from completely different walks of life, yet your father sounds like my father. Why? Because the standard was set on the Bible and not Modern Family or whatever show you want to insert.
Was it a good idea for America to help the president of Ukraine financially and neglect the crisis at the border?
Governor, I think this might be a great one for you. You've talked a lot about the border crisis. Hey, I'm putting you on the spot. Come on, we're in your backyard here. So you get first dibs.
In relationship to Ukraine, I appreciate the fact that President Zelenskyy did not ask America to send troops. We were never asked to put boots on the ground. And there's a lot of controversy of how can we help Ukraine when we have issues at home. But that was the same logic that in the run-up to World War II, America also engaged in the debate and said, how should we be involved in what's happening to the Jews in Germany and in Poland when we've got our own problems here at home? And then a few years later, after 11 million people were murdered, 6 million of them just because they were Jewish, there was an enormous level of guilt, and people said, how come we didn't intervene sooner? How come we didn't send aid? How come we didn't speak out sooner? I think you have to put in perspective that is it our responsibility to fix Ukraine? Of course it isn't. But is it our interest to say to someone like Putin, who invades a country and does it with a sense of criminal lawlessness, if he is able to get away with it there, what's next? Do you think he'll stop? Of course he won't. And if he continues to do that, what will North Korea, what will China do? What will other nations do who see the opportunity? So in one sense, America can say that's none of our business, and I hear some of my fellow conservatives say that very thing. It is none of our business, we should not engage. But I think that we have the opportunity to help the Ukrainians fight their own war, which is all they've asked us to do, is give them arms and give them support and supplies so they can fight the war. We've done the same for Israel, and I'm glad we have. Israel has never once asked an American soldier to put a boot on the ground and do the fighting for them. They have asked us for technology and for weaponry and for assistance, which we have provided. And if we hadn't have provided it, Israel would never have made it past the War of Independence in 1948. They would have been destroyed in the 50s against Egypt. They wouldn't have made it through 1967, and they would have been obliterated in 1973 in the Yom Kippur War. So we can say that we should never get involved in any other nation. But I also want to say, let's go to the scriptures. If there is a vacuum and we do not fill it with godliness, then demons will rush in 7 times worse than what was there before. So I don't like us having to get involved. I want us to take care of America first. I'm an America first kind of guy, but I'm not an America only kind of guy because I think that's short-sighted. And historically, when we do that, millions of people get murdered, not just in World War II, but throughout history. And as a believer, I don't want us to be those people who say, it's not in my backyard, so I don't care. It's my neighbor's children who are being murdered, not mine, so I have no responsibility. I can't justify that as a believer.
Yeah.
Inflation has been out of control, to put it mildly, at record levels that we haven't seen in some 40 years. Is there a chance going forward in the coming year to kind of get that under control, or is this the new normal?
If the policies of the current administration continue, it is the new normal. A lot of people don't understand that inflation in the past year means that your expenses for 12 months of living have not gone down, but your income to meet those 12 months of expenses has gone down by a full month. So you're paying 12 months of bills on 11 months of income. Inflation is a thief. It's stolen a month of your income. And so it makes it harder for you to send your kids to camp or to school or to put clothes on their back or to take a vacation or to send your neighbors a nice gift. So inflation is not nebulous. It hits every single family. And it hits the families at the bottom of the economic spectrum far more really harshly than it hits the folks at the top. People at the top are going to absorb it. Their lifestyles won't change. People at the bottom will feel a gut punch. Right. And don't think for a moment that the people in Washington share the lifestyle or the economic conditions of the average American family, because they don't. They are immune from it. And yet they are also immune to what American families are feeling. Let me make one point, because I really wanted to jump in on this immigration thing.
Yeah.
When we say people are coming to the country, we need to present the gospel. Let me tell you something else we better present. Are the countries gone? If we do not help explain the uniqueness of America, it's more than just simply saying, come to America, we'll tell you about Jesus. It's come to America. Let us tell you what is unique about this country than any other country that's ever existed. We believe in the power of the individual. We are not a country that is built on collectivism. We're built on individualism. Our salvation is individualistic. You don't get saved because you go as a family and everybody in the family becomes Christian because dad says so. Individually, you have to repent of sin. You have to trust Jesus. But that permeates our culture politically as well, which means that as an individual, you are personally responsible for your well-being. You do not belong to the state. You're not property of the state. You have property. You can own property. And the state is your servant. You are not the servant of the state. That makes America the only country in the history of the world where the government is the servant of the people rather than the people being the servant of the government. And if we don't teach that, we lose this country.
By the way, everyone in our audience right now, inflation, how many is it a top 5 issue for in 2023? Wow. Okay, Belinda Lane, we've got another question.
Yes, we have all felt the economic struggle. And we have with us Bill Wassel. He is a small business owner of 38 years. Bill, what is your question for the panel?
Thank you. As a business owner for 38 years, we're concerned about the coming shift to global control of finances, such as CBDCs and ESG scores.
So basically, less sovereignty for the American economy is what you're saying. The concern is.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Yes. Any thoughts on that? Anyone want to pick that up? I mean,
I want to jump on that one. I got to tell you, this gets to the issue of borders. It gets to the issue of defining what is America. And when my parents came to this country as legal immigrants, they were made Americans. They weren't just said, you can live here. They were made to understand that what we have here is a unique, glorious system. It's a privilege. None of us deserves to have this. But in order to have this, you have to work at it. Teach it to your kids, just as Governor Huckabee was saying. Benjamin Franklin was asked about this, what have you given us, Dr. Franklin, a monarchy or a republic? When he was leaving the Constitutional Convention, he said, a republic, madam, if you can keep it, which is the title of another one of my books that deals with this issue. But the point is, we, the people, have to understand what these blessings are, how it works, how America is different. And when we begin to enter a global economy and we begin to cede our sovereignty and these ideas and pretend that there's an equivalence between the atheist communists leading China as though they are equivalent to those who have led this nation. In other words, in that country, they don't have respect for life. If they don't like you, they'll put you in prison. They will harvest your organs. We have to make a clear distinction, and we have to say, in America, this is how we do business.
Absolutely. Eric, as you said, the founders talked about it. Ronald Reagan had some great quotes about this. Governor, you mentioned American exceptionalism, that concept, that reality, and a younger generation. We need to pass the torch and pass that on. It seems like something's being lost in translation right now. How many people in the audience right now are concerned about cancel culture? Yeah. And how many, as Christians, feel like you are increasingly being targeted and marginalized for your beliefs? All right. This is an issue that's getting bigger and bigger as we move into 2023. Rick, what are your thoughts on this? Look, America, historically, a Judeo-Christian nation, for sure, founded on biblical values, majority Christian nation, and yet poll after poll shows that the numbers of Christians in the United States are dramatically decreasing, especially among Generation Z. How troubled should we be by this?
Very troubled. I think many of them see the church as irrelevant. The critical question becomes why. Listen, we have a lot of issues. When we look at our issues, I think about how these issues were dealt with in the Bible. I'll give you an example. You want to talk about controversy. Look at the church, in the Galatian church. Should we let non-Jewish people in? I mean, you talk about an issue. At stake was their salvation, right? And I just think if you really look at Galatians chapter 5, you see a blueprint that this country has strayed away from. In chapter 5 alone, this is what you see God speaking to us today, saying, walk by the Spirit, be led by the Spirit, live by the Spirit. Listen, we can argue all night whether something is political or not political. We can argue all night about the pros and the cons of what's going on at the border. But unless this country returns back to a fundamental belief that God is in charge, that we ought be Spirit-led, what's going to happen is that the leaders will mire in controversy as opposed to seeking the true and living God. And I'm concerned about that.
Yeah. I can't think of a more important conversation about our calling as Christians than how we care for children and how important it is for the next generation to be strong in their faith. And I have with me Andy Lacey. He's a father of 2 and a school board member. Andy, what question do you have tonight?
What can be done to protect our kids from age-inappropriate material in the school system?
Yeah, again, we're all parents, right? This hits close to home for all of us. Governor, I'll start with you. As someone who was the governor of Arkansas, obviously, very closely acquainted with the school system there, what can be done as we see this woke movement, so-called, making inroads in America's schools, whether it's transgenderism, critical race theory? It's a real problem, even in small-town school districts. What can be done to fight back against that? Well,
the guy that just asked the question, Andy, he's doing it. He ran for school board.
Yep.
That's how you start. You run for school board. God bless you, Andy, because that's what's happened. Christians have pulled out of the political arena. They didn't want to run for city council or county commission or school board. By the way, those are the 3 hardest positions in government. They really are. Every time I see a school board member, city councilman, county commissioner, I say, you know what? You're in the toughest spot of government. You don't get paid much. People can get right through to you. There are no filters between you and an angry citizen. And they can see you at church, at the grocery store, at the ball game for your kids. At least when I was governor, there were a lot of layers between me and somebody who was mad at me. And those layers had guns. So that was a good thing. Unlike Andy, who's a school board member, who's going to catch it. But you know what? It's guys like Andy running for the school board, and then it's mothers and fathers like many of you that may not ever feel led to run for school board, but show up at the school board meeting. Never say, I don't make a difference, because I've never run for anything. Show up. Yeah. Remember the scene in Forrest Gump when the storm was, brewing, and Lieutenant Dan said, "Okay, God, if you're really there, let me see you." And Forrest Gump made the statement, "And God showed up." And suddenly the sky came undone. Well, what I'm saying to you is, be the storm and show up.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks for sticking around. Since you made it here to the end, that must mean you liked the video. So you might as well subscribe and hit that notification bell below. But if you really hated it, just click the like button 3 times.